Don't talk. The words slid through the bars in a whisper so thin, Maria Santos almost missed them. She stopped mid-stride in the long, dim corridor of Harris County Jail. The hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed louder than usual, the sound bouncing against concrete and steel. She was used to noise in this place. The snores, coughs, inmates muttering to themselves. But tonight, nothing. Just her footsteps. Just silence. Her hand went to her holster automatically. That was training. A whisper from an inmate usually meant a trick, a setup. She'd been on this job for 8 years, long enough to know that nothing in jail was casual. Every cough, every smile, every sound had a reason. She turned toward the cell, and that's when she saw him. Marcus Williams, a man serving life for armed robbery. The quiet one. For almost a decade, he had been the kind of inmate every officer noticed but never feared. He read books, kept his head down, never joined fights, never asked for favors. He was steady, predictable, the kind you almost forgot was even there. But tonight Marcus was different. His face glistened with sweat even though the block was cool. His back was ramrod straight, and his eyes locked onto hers with a kind of urgency she had never seen before. Again, the whisper, "Don't talk. Just listen." Maria froze. Everything her academy instructors drilled into her mind fought against this moment. Never show weakness. Never let an inmate feel control. Always follow procedure. She thought of reaching for her radio, reporting in to dispatch. But Marcus leaned forward, gripping the edge of his bunk, his voice trembling with a desperate truth. "They're waiting for you. At the end of the hall. 3 of them. With weapons." Maria's pulse quickened. She turned her head slightly, peering down the long corridor she had walked thousands of times. To most, it would look empty. The stretch of floor leading to the security checkpoint was still, quiet, lit in patches by buzzing overhead lamps. But Marcus's voice made her see it differently now. Shadows that could hide movement. Corners that could mask men waiting to strike. She looked back at him, searching his face for games, for manipulation. But there was none. There was only fear. And not fear for himself. Fear for her. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered back before she could stop herself. His answer was immediate. "Because you're different. You treat us like people. You don't deserve what they're planning to do." For a split second, the walls of Harris County felt closer, heavier, as if the building itself knew what was coming. Maria's radio crackled on her shoulder. "Dispatch." They wanted her hourly check-in. 30 seconds to respond before they sent backup. 30 seconds to decide. Call for help and risk triggering an attack early, or trust a prisoner's word, a man with no reason to protect her, and buy herself time. She had been here long enough to know the names Marcus whispered next. Rodriguez, Thompson, Jackson, all inmates, all dangerous, all with a history of violence against officers. And then came the detail that chilled her blood. Marcus leaned closer to the bars, lowering his voice to a rasp. "Jackson has a key, a master key. If they get past you, they'll open the cells. All of them." Maria's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about her. This was about every officer, every worker, every soul inside the facility. If that key was real, one ambush could turn into a full-scale riot in minutes. Her training told her to stick to the rules. Her instincts told her this man was telling the truth. In that moment, Maria Santos wasn't just walking a corridor. She was standing on a knife edge between order and chaos, between life and death. And Marcus Williams, the lifer who never spoke out of turn, wasn't warning her for himself. He was warning her for what was coming next. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now back to the video. The warning had been given, but the questions it raised could change everything. Maria Santos had been working this cell block long enough to know danger when she felt it. Her training told her to follow protocol, to call it in. Her instincts told her that Marcus Williams, the man whispering through the bars, wasn't lying. But why him? Why now? Why risk everything to help her? Maria was no rookie. 8 years of walking the same corridors had taught her the rhythm of this jail. She could tell the difference between restless snoring and an inmate faking sleep. She could recognize the sound of a toothbrush scraping against concrete, reshaped into a weapon. She followed rules, not because she was naive, but because rules kept people alive. Her colleagues respected her for it. The inmates tolerated it. But what separated Maria from many of her fellow officers was something harder to measure: restraint. She didn't bark orders unless she needed to. She didn't belittle men already stripped of freedom. She treated them with a kind of quiet dignity. And while some mocked her for it, others noticed. One of those was Marcus Williams. Marcus had been in this block for years. Some men survived prison by joining gangs, others by making trades. Marcus chose silence. Day after day, he kept to himself, a paperback novel in his hands, push-ups until his arms shook, a folded blanket tucked tight the way soldiers do. He never asked for special meals. He never begged for favors. He watched. He listened. And in a place where information could be more valuable than food, Marcus saw everything. There were whispers about his past. That before prison, Marcus had worn a uniform. That he'd been trained to see danger before it arrived. Nothing was ever confirmed. But his eyes, sharp and searching, told their own story. And tonight, those eyes carried something Maria had never seen in him before: fear. The whisper named them one by one. Rodriguez, a fighter known for his fists, his loyalty to the strongest gang, his willingness to bleed if it meant making others fear him. Thompson, broad-shouldered, heavy, his strength spoken of like a warning among guards. A man who carried grudges the way others carried scars. And Jackson, the new one, just transferred in. A man with a file so thick it looked like a stack of warnings. Younger, sharper, with eyes that studied everything around him. He wasn't reckless. He was deliberate, calculated. 3 men, 3 roles. The enforcer, the brute, the planner. Together, they were a storm waiting to break. Harris County was the kind of jail that lived on a knife's edge, designed to hold thousands, managed by too few. Its walls carried more tension than its officers could ever admit. Cameras that didn't cover every corner. Budget cuts that left blind spots, temporarily unresolved. Maintenance requests delayed for months. And a culture where favors whispered in the right ear could turn into opportunities that never should exist. It was a place where silence wasn't peace. It was pressure. And pressure, in a jail, always meant one thing: something was about to break. Before the night of the whisper, before the decision that would change everything, there were the days that looked ordinary. And yet, hidden inside those routines, were signs of what was coming. Morning always began the same for Maria. Coffee poured into a chipped ceramic mug she refused to throw away. The photograph taped to her refrigerator of her brother, Detective Carlos Santos, in his Houston PD blues. Another of the 2 of them together, laughing at a family barbecue. Maria carried those images with her into the jail each night. For her, discipline wasn't just about rules. It was about duty. She ironed her uniform until the creases looked sharp enough to cut. She checked her gear twice before every shift. Colleagues described her as meticulous, fair, and unshakable. She was the kind of officer who wouldn't raise her voice unless she had to. In a world of concrete and steel where tempers often flared, her calmness became her strength. But calm didn't mean blind. Maria noticed details: a man who avoided eye contact, a cell where conversation suddenly stopped when she passed, a noise that didn't fit. She logged those things, quietly, carefully. And that vigilance is what kept her alive. Marcus Williams lived his life in silence. Days filled with paperbacks whose pages grew worn, letters that never seemed to reach anyone on the outside, push-ups until his body trembled, and a folded blanket on his bunk, folded with military precision. He was not like the others. Where many men bragged or threatened, Marcus listened. His silence wasn't weakness. It was observation. He had scars on his knuckles, the kind that spoke of fights long past, but no new ones. He didn't trade cigarettes or favors. He didn't know anyone. Rumors followed him like shadows. Some whispered he had once been a soldier. Others said he knew tactics, discipline, survival in a way that most men didn't. He never confirmed or denied it. But the way he scanned the room, the way he measured every movement, it told its own story. Harris County Detention Center wasn't just walls and cells. It was a system of cracks and compromises. A 2-foot blind spot by the emergency exit. A gap in camera coverage everyone knew about, but nobody fixed. Budget memos slid across desks, stamped with the word, deferred. Maintenance logs showed requests unresolved for months. And inside those gaps, danger grew. The culture among guards reflected it too. A quiet code. Officers traded favors to get lighter posts, or looked the other way when certain inmates moved contraband. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to make suspicion part of survival. Somewhere in that web of favors and silence was Thompson's nephew, a name buried in the maintenance roster. He had access to keys, locks, systems, access that no one was watching closely enough. And that access would soon prove catastrophic. Keys clinked against belts in the hallway. A sound every officer knew, every inmate studied. The sound of control, the sound of power. And then, a flash of tension. In another block, a fight broke out. 2 inmates squared off, voices rising. The air turned electric. Maria stepped in. Calm, firm, steady. No shouting. No swinging her baton. Just presence. Just control. She defused it in seconds. The men backed down. No blood spilled. No paperwork filed. The other inmates noticed. Maria Santos wasn't the kind of officer who lost control. She wasn't the kind who treated every man like a number. That quiet respect she earned would be the reason Marcus whispered to her later. In a place designed for control, predictability is safety, which is why the silence bothered her most. It started with a whisper, but in prison, a whisper could be as deadly as a weapon. Maria Santos stood frozen outside Marcus Williams's cell, the hum of the fluorescent lights pressing into her ears. Her instincts said call it in. Her training said draw your weapon. But Marcus's eyes said something else entirely. Trust me, or you won't leave this hallway alive. Marcus leaned forward, his face pale, his voice low enough that even the other inmates couldn't hear. 3 at the end of the hall. Weapons. Don't call it in yet. Maria's hand hovered over her radio. She almost pressed it, almost sent the signal that would bring backup running. But she stopped. Her thumb pressed against the button. She froze. Her hand slid down to the holster at her hip. She froze again. Every instinct screamed at her to move. But she didn't. Instead, she listened. Marcus's voice carried urgency now, the words coming faster. Rodriguez. Closet by the checkpoint. Maria pictured it. The cramped supply closet officers used for mops and bleach. Big enough for one man to crouch. Invisible until it was too late. Thompson. Behind the water fountain. Her mind mapped the block instantly. A heavy stone fountain just before the doors. In the shadows, a perfect crouching point. Jackson. Blind spot near the emergency exit. And that was the one that sent chills down her spine. She knew the blind spot. Every officer did. The cameras couldn't cover it. Complaints had been filed. Requests made. But the budget never stretched far enough to fix it. They hadn't just chosen random places to hide. They had studied the jail. Someone knew the infrastructure as well as the guards themselves. Then Marcus dropped the detail that made Maria's blood run cold. Jackson has a key. A master key. Her breath caught in her throat. A master key wasn't a rumor you tossed lightly. A master key meant one thing: collapse. Inmates had weapons. They had a plan. And now, they had the only thing standing between control and chaos: a master key. In the wrong hands, this wasn't just an ambush. It was the beginning of a riot. Maria's heart pounded. The silence of Block D wasn't calm anymore. It was a countdown. She had to know if Marcus was telling the truth. Maria began moving down the corridor, each step deliberate, measured, her boots echoing on the concrete. Her eyes scanned every corner, every shadow, her body tensed for movement. Her destination, the vending machines near cell 22. Behind them, a maintenance tunnel, narrow, suffocating, but an escape route. If she reached it, she could slip into Block C, circle around, maybe survive. But it wasn't easy. To get there, she had to pass 3 cells that belonged to Rodriguez's closest allies. Men who would know if something was off. Men who would alert the ambushers waiting for her. As she passed cell 19, she caught a flicker of movement. A shadow shifted across the narrow slit in the door. Tommy Valdez, Rodriguez's right-hand man, a man serving time for aggravated assault, already responsible for 2 attacks on guards. And Tommy was awake. His voice slithered through the bars, low and mocking. "Evening, Officer Santos. Working late tonight." Maria didn't respond. She couldn't, but the silence was enough to encourage him. "You ever wonder," he said, his tone too casual, "what would happen if you needed help in here and nobody could hear you scream?" Maria's pulse hammered. She was inches from the vending machines, inches from the tunnel, and then her radio crackled. Static, just a flicker of noise, but it was enough. Tommy stopped speaking. He stepped closer to the bars. His grin widened. "Well," he whispered, "looks like tonight's the night." Maria bolted the last few feet, dropping to her knees in front of the vending machines. She yanked her multi-tool from her belt, hands shaking as she attacked the screws of the access panel. 1 screw, loose. 2nd screw, loose. 3rd screw was stuck, rusted. She pressed harder, metal squealing against metal. The sound echoed like a scream down the corridor. And then she heard it. Footsteps. Heavy. Fast. From 3 directions at once. Rodriguez emerged from the closet. Thompson from behind the fountain. Jackson from the blind spot near the exit. They weren't just names in a whisper anymore. They were real. And they were coming. The screw gave way. The panel dropped. Maria shoved herself into the tunnel, scraping her arms, her belt catching on the narrow concrete walls. Behind her, Tommy's voice thundered. "She's in the tunnel, just like Jackson said she would be." Maria scrambled forward, her knees slamming into the ground, her lungs burning. The tunnel stretched ahead, 50 feet of darkness. If she reached the end, she could escape. She could live. But then, Rodriguez's voice, calm and confident, cut through the chaos. "Forget her. We'll deal with Williams." Maria froze. Her blood ran cold. Marcus. They knew. They knew he had warned her. And now, they were going back to silence him. Maria pressed her forehead against the cold concrete of the tunnel. She could keep going. She could reach Block C, call for help, survive. Or she could turn back. Go back into danger. Back into the trap. Her breath came in shallow bursts. Sweat dripped down her spine. She closed her eyes and made her choice. She turned around. "If you're still with us at this point, tell us in the comments. Would you trust a prisoner's warning in the dark?" Maria stopped crawling. Then she did the unthinkable. She pushed herself backward through the narrow concrete throat of the tunnel, scraped elbows and knees, breath shaking, until the glow of Block D returned like a warning light. She wasn't running anymore. She was going back. Maria slid out behind the vending machines, listened. Footsteps were retreating. 2 sets, quick, purposeful, heading for Marcus's cell. A 3rd pair stayed in the corridor, searching, the rhythm of a hunter who expected a cornered victim. She stood, steadied her hands, and moved low along the wall. The alarm pull was 30 yards away, a red handle under a plexiglass cover. If she yanked it, doors would slam shut across the block, lights would change, protocols would lock everything in place. It would buy Marcus time. It would also trap her with whoever wasn't fast enough to clear the corridor. She sprinted. A shout behind her. "There!" Then pounding steps. Maria hit the station, smashed the cover with her elbow, and pulled. Sirens erupted. Red strobes strobed down the spine of Block D. Heavy magnets thudded. Cell doors clanged. The checkpoint sealed. The main corridor doors locked like bank vaults. Silence ended. Containment began. She had cut off the route to Marcus for the men behind her, but she had sealed herself in with them. Maria turned. 2 figures stood in the flashing red wash. Jackson, posture measured, eyes steady. And Tommy Valdez, broader, restless, with that grin that never reached his eyes. Between pulses of light, the corridor looked like a stuttering film strip. Metal, shadow, faces. Jackson took a slow step forward. "Reset the alarm," he said, voice level. "Then we all forget tonight." Maria didn't raise her weapon. Not yet. She kept her back to the wall and her gaze moving. Hands, hips, shoulders, reading intent. "Forget," she said. You can't even agree on who set this up. Tommy glanced at Jackson. Just a flicker. Enough. Fear doesn't always break people. Doubt does. Maria knew she couldn't outmuscle them, but she could outthink them. She had to turn two allies into opponents without firing a shot. You think everyone's with you, Maria said, voice steady over the alarm. They're not. Tommy's jaw tightened. We got the whole block. Do you? Maria nodded past them. Listen. They did. And in the brief lull between siren cycles, another sound emerged. The complete lack of cheering, taunting, or banging from the cells. Doors had just locked. If the block was on their side, the noise would be deafening. Instead, stillness. Maria spoke into the vacuum. They're done being scared of you. They're tired of paying for your trouble. Tommy shifted his weight, just a fraction closer to Jackson. She's playing you, Jackson murmured. But the confidence had a hairline crack. Maria pressed where it hurt. Who told on you last time? Who let the key slip? You sure you picked the right partner? Tommy's eyes cut sideways. I didn't lose anything. Maria's tone stayed almost gentle. Funny. That's not what your friend in maintenance said. The word landed like a dropped wrench. Maintenance. Jackson's attention sharpened. She knows about that? Maria didn't blink. Enough to know one of you has a nephew with access. Enough to know one of you needed more money than his paycheck could cover. 3 beats. Siren. Strobe. Breaths. A tiny wedge of doubt slid between them. Keys don't appear out of thin air. They're built, one step at a time. In places like this, guilt often hides behind the ordinary. And the ordinary hides in paperwork. This wasn't just about a hallway or a bad night. It reached beyond the walls. The job follows you home. The people you arrest have brothers, cousins, friends. They call. They visit. They remember. Retaliation doesn't always knock on your front door. Sometimes, it waits in a blind corner at work. If you want to understand a conspiracy, watch its timing. Someone knew the rhythm of every radio check, knew when to speak, knew how long a grace window lasted before backup moved. They didn't just plan an assault. They planned the silence around it. A single waveform line compares Maria's normal voice pattern to the spoofed ones. The differences are subtle but real. The kind of detail you don't catch at first. The kind you catch later, with a cold feeling in your stomach. Back in the corridor, Jackson inches closer. Tommy circles left, trying to force Maria to split her attention. She keeps talking. Calm, relentless. You think this is about tonight, she says. It isn't. This started weeks ago. The attack wasn't improvisation. It was scheduled. Jackson's jaw tightens as if he's calculating who had access to that work order. Tommy's face shows the first flash of uncertainty. Inside a locked cell, 2 hands clasp as an older inmate whispers a prayer for the quiet man in 47. Inside 47, Marcus sits still, listening. He knows the sound of a plan collapsing. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in the space between allies. Maria lowers her voice one notch more. You're not on the same side anymore. You just haven't realized it. The attack wasn't the story. The paperwork was. The corridor held its breath. 2 men advanced. One woman refused to move. And somewhere, behind a locked steel door, a quiet inmate listened for the sound that would tell him which way the night would break. This wasn't just about fists or blades anymore. It was about proof. Conspiracies hide in shadows. Records don't. Payments moved in small amounts, never enough to trigger a flag, until they formed a road you could follow with your finger. At the end of that road stood a door no one should open. Access to locks, metals, and time alone with keyways. Maria watches Jackson's face as she says, evenly, this started with a family discount, didn't it? A nephew with tools and time. Tommy glances at Jackson, and then, subtly, toward the ceiling camera. He's calculating who might already know. A table. 2 rough blanks. 1 polished key with fresh file marks. A gloved hand tries it in a practice lock. Click. Success. A handoff in a laundry room. A second handoff near the kitchen cages. Then a drop. A single key slips into a vent and is lost for days. The key Jackson carried wasn't born in his pocket. It belonged, at first, to someone higher, someone who intended to control the flow. But control slipped. The first buyer lost the metal during a transfer drill. In the confusion, Jackson found opportunity. He didn't invent this. He inherited it and made it worse. Maria's voice stays level. You weren't the original buyer. You were the upgrade. Isn't that right, Jackson? His jaw tightens. That's the tell. When rooms like Block D explode, people look for heroes or villains. Cases are built on something simpler. Ink. The more you looked, the less random it seemed. Camera angles didn't drift. Shifts didn't line up by accident. A picture emerged. Not neat, not finished, but clear enough to trace. A second key, not the one in Jackson's hand. Another, smaller, cleaner, kept closer to the chest by someone who understood what power truly was. If there were two keys, the breach wasn't just wide. It was layered. Back in the corridor, Jackson steps closer, voice low, words chosen to wound. Call your brother, he says. Tell Detective Santos this is his fault. Maria doesn't flinch until he says Carlos's first name, softly, like an old friend. We know where he parks. We know when he leaves early for those youth league games. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's fear held still. Maria's breath hitches, then steadies. She lowers her voice to a whisper that makes Jackson lean in to hear. You just gave me more than you took, she says. Now I know your source listens outside this block. You earn it by risk. Force wasn't going to save Maria. Doubt would. She let silence do the work. One long beat. Then, Tommy, who told you the tunnel would be open? Who told you I'd go there? Tommy shoots a look at Jackson. You said. Jackson cuts him off. Doesn't matter who said what. It does if she never should have known about maintenance, Maria says, almost kindly. It does if someone talked too much. Or got paid twice. That lands. Tommy's shoulders square. Paid twice. Jackson's eyes flick to the camera again, calculating angles, witnesses, escape routes that no longer exist. Sirens swell beyond the sealed doors, different pitch, heavier engines. Response teams. The cavalry. Time shrinking. Maria steps half a foot to the right, forcing Tommy and Jackson into each other's sight lines. He's going to let you take the fall, she tells Tommy. He already rehearsed the story. You got greedy. You went off script. He tried to stop you. Tommy's jaw grinds. You set the closet, not me. Jackson's voice hardens. You brought noise when I asked for quiet. You sold me a bad key. Tommy snaps. There. The fracture. Pressure had held them together. Pressure now pulled them apart. Tommy lunges first. One step and a shove meant more to prove a point than finish a fight. Jackson shoves back, sharper, controlled, the planner trying to hold his plan intact. Their balance breaks. A crude blade flashes in emergency light. Tommy's forearm rakes forward, Jackson twists, then clips Tommy hard with an elbow. They tumble. Arms tangle. A weapon skitters across concrete. Maria doesn't fire. She doesn't have to. She lets the plan dissolve itself. Boots drum the far side of the sealed doors. Radios bark codes. Keys rattle on the other side like rain against a window. Sometimes the quietest man in the room changes everything without leaving his cell. Marcus's face through the narrow window, still, watchful. He hears the change. He knows when danger shifts from straight lines into confusion. He doesn't smile. He doesn't move. He just waits for the part where waiting ends. Backup arrived, to a hallway of bodies and a story nobody believed at first. When the doors finally opened and the white floodlights swallowed the corridor, the story didn't end. It widened. This wasn't just the night Maria lived. It was the night the jail had to answer for what it chose not to see. They moved Marcus first. 2 officers from a different wing, escorted by a supervisor who didn't take his eyes off the paperwork even while he walked, transferred Marcus Williams to protective custody. No announcement. No chatter. Just a quiet procession past doors that had learned to stay silent. The man who'd whispered, "Don't talk," was now the reason several men would have to answer questions they never wanted to hear. Maria followed procedure with a precision that felt like armor. She filed her incident report line by line, timestamp by timestamp, citing by citing. She listed every detail she could swear to under oath. The positions of Rodriguez, Thompson, and Jackson, the approach, the tunnel, the alarm, the confrontation, the words that cut deepest, Carlos's name in Jackson's mouth. The report didn't stay in her hands for long. It went up the chain, then sideways, then higher. Internal Affairs opened a preliminary review before sunrise. The questions weren't poetic. They were practical. By the end of 72 hours, 5 staff were pulled off active duty. Not names, not headlines, but composite roles that made the machine run. Charges for Jackson and Rodriguez escalated. The paperwork called it what it was: assault on an officer, conspiracy to commit escape, possession of contraband weapons, attempted racketeering with internal facilitation. Thompson didn't go home. He was suspended pending trial. The badge he liked to flash now locked in an evidence drawer. When a wall cracks, dust falls long before anyone admits there's a hole. It was a small sound that found it. A dull tink behind the Pepsi machine near cell 22. A maintenance worker, this time with a second pair of eyes watching him work, slid the unit out to check the access panel Maria had used. Behind it, taped under a lip of metal with gaffer tape meant for stage lights, lay a key the size of a thumbnail. Not the thick, rough, filed job Jackson carried. Sleeker, cleaner, newer. The first key had swagger. This one had patience. Under magnification, the tiny teeth told their own story. It wasn't cut for a cell. It was cut for a cabinet. A key that didn't open places with people, it opened places with systems. Junction boxes, lock boxes, small doors with big consequences. The conclusion was simple and heavy. This wasn't a one-night operation. It was an ongoing pipeline with spares, backups, and the confidence that comes from repetition. You don't find a root system by pulling one weed. What do you trust when the rules are the reason you're standing in the open? Protocol said, call it in. Instinct said, listen first. Maria chose 10 seconds of listening over reflex. 10 seconds that bent the night away from disaster. 10 seconds that kept a key from turning every lock on the block. Systems don't fail at their loudest points. They fail at their smallest incentives and at their quietest blind spots. A memo held a camera 3 feet in the wrong direction. A roster let the same 2 names orbit the same hallway. A nephew touched metal he never should have touched. None of those facts shouted. Together, they moved the ground. Trust isn't naive. Trust is calculated. You weigh the face in front of you, the history behind it, the risk ahead of it. And sometimes you choose a person over a procedure for exactly as long as it takes to live. Maria visited Marcus after the transfer. Not with a parade. With one form and a brief window. Glass separated them. Phones crackled. She said, I believed you. He said, you listened. They didn't talk about heroism. They didn't trade promises they couldn't keep. She watched the way he folded the corner of a commissary form as if it were a blanket. He watched the way she squared the papers in her hand until the edges aligned perfectly. On the way out, Maria paused at the threshold. The words from that night returned, not as a warning, but as a lesson. Don't talk. This time, it meant something else. Listen, order isn't the absence of danger. It's the presence of people who choose the right 10 seconds. The corridor is quiet now. Evidence bags are sealed. Forms are signed. What remains are the choices people made in the space of a few heartbeats. So let me ask you, genuinely, as someone who's been with this story from the first whisper to the final report, what do you think really happened that night? Strategy or luck? Did Maria steer the outcome with 10 seconds of listening, or did a plan fall apart on its own? Tell us below in the comments. We will be reading every single one. And if you've come this far, you already know this wasn't just about one hallway. It was about how small decisions stack into something larger. If that interests you, you'll want to see where this pattern shows up next. And if stories like this matter to you, stories about accountability and courage told without shouting, subscribe to our channel for more real-life crime twists. And if there's someone in your life who values the same things, share this with them.